It seems like it's been 40 weeks since you got 40 winks. Your back pain? Unbearable. Tossing, turning, trying to find that pain-free position. And that's the moment you realize you can't spend another waking moment putting off treatment.
The Joint and Spine Center is Cincinnati's leading destination for spine care, with a ton of surgical and non-surgical treatments for back pain. So when a moment has the power to change the rest of your life, go to the one place with the power to change it for the better, the Christ Hospital Health Network. This changes everything.
The Pound This Podcast is brought to you by the Christ Hospital Health Network. This is the Pound This Podcast, episode 698, A Healthy Relationship with Food with Celeste Rains-Turk.
I want to lose weight, but I don't know how to get started.
What should I meal prep every week?
How do I get those sweet booty gains?
Inspiration for your healthy lifestyle. The Pound This Podcast with Amanda Valentine.
Thank you so much for listening to the Pound This Podcast. I'm Amanda Valentine. Very excited to chat with my guest today, whose LinkedIn page probably had to take a week to fill out because you've done so many amazing things, is Celeste Rains-Turk. How are you?
Amazing. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of, I guess, just before we get into a deeper conversation, just rattle off all of the things that you've done in just a bullet point fashion.
Okay. In bullet points, I started my college journey after getting my personal training certification. So I'm NASM certified. I went into college to study dietetics, realized that wasn't for me. Loved psychology, studied psychology, got my bachelor's in psychology, then went on to earn my clinical mental health counseling degree, which I'm going to get in 2022. I'm in the final phase of it, which is great. And I wrote a best-selling book amidst the getting my degree in psychology that was in self-help. It's called Believe Your Way to Badass. I have my podcast, Confessions of a Bikini Pro, where I interview IFBB bikini pros, and I compete and I do public speaking, and I help women with their relationship with food, their body, and their goals.
Yeah, that's a lot. And congratulations on all of that. I mean, that's amazing. And I did go for some walks this week and listen to your podcast, and just like, I mean, I is never in my plans to compete in bikini, but do I have appreciation for that, because that, I mean, the work that goes into that psychologically, physically, everything else, I mean, that is a commitment.
Oh, yes, it is. And I don't think it's for everybody, nor do I think everyone should want to or need to do it. So I appreciate what you said. And I think it's a really beautiful thing. And there's a lot of people in that sport who think we can all relate to, but we don't always see it that way. So that's why I started the show, so we could see that they are relatable.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's, for me personally, just, having a weight loss journey, when I see that people have had a weight loss journey and then kind of like, hey, you know what? I think I can do this now. And then like compete in that arena. It's like, oh my God, like, what a badass.
It's awesome.
So I met you because you work with Sarah, who I've talked about a ton on this podcast with her health coaching. She's been a guest on this podcast multiple times, from finding her coach and everything through this podcast. But you're currently on her team, and I love that your title is Food Relationship Coach, because I'm like, oh man, do we all need that? So pretty much break that down for me of like, how do you help people with their relationship with food?
That's a really great question. It's complicated. I think a lot of people hear food relationship coaching and they instantly think all we're going to do is talk about food. In reality, it's always so much more than food itself. And when I'm working with people on their relationship with food, and I do help more than women as well. I help men and I help people who aren't competitors. I help all sorts of people, but it's rarely about the food. And when we're talking about a relationship with food, we're talking about how you think about food, how you associate with food, habits around food. And then even further than that, why and when did some of those behaviors and habits begin? What do they mean for you? And why are they coming up even still or at all? And are we trying to change them in an even unhealthier way? Like, oh, I can't stop eating chocolate, so I'm going to throw away all the chocolate, never eat it again, and then binge on it every time I do see it. we have to be thinking of relationship with food as a relationship that you have with anything else. It's multifaceted, and there's a lot that we have to uncover with it, but understand that it's possible to change it. And there's no right or wrong, in my opinion, relationship with food. It's the healthiest relationship with food for you. And it can look different for somebody else.
So how often in your clients that you work with, do you come across a lot of disordered eating?
A lot, all the time, unfortunately. And it's so like studying psychology was interesting, and it still is, and counseling, because America is guided by the DSM-5, and this is a diagnostic statistic manual, and it's for all things disorders and mental health diagnosis. And I can't call myself a counselor yet, and one day I will, and maybe even beyond that. But what I've realized is America, I don't know about all other countries, but I know in places like Europe, they don't use a manual. Instead, what they do is they ask people about their symptoms, and then they come up with a diagnosis. And I actually kind of prefer that, because if I've learned anything from psychology, it's that intention is very important, and it's everything. And our perspective is everything. So you could have someone with signs or symptoms of disordered eating who has no real risk factor to those things, or has no real repercussions from those. They're not experiencing negative behaviors because of it, or negative affect in their life because of it. Instead, this is actually really beneficial for them. So I see, a lot of disordered eating, but disordered to whom? To the person. Disordered to what I know about food and what I know about what it takes to be successful and mentally at peace. But ultimately, I kind of just see any disordered eating is the type of eating that gets in the way of you feeling ultimately like your best and ultimately on track to achieving your goals. So there's different types of disordered eating for sure. There's disordered eating habits that turn into eating disorders. But I just think that intention is so important, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And I think just having the discussion, at least, for me on my own journey and the journey that I continue to be on, I think once I started kind of putting the psychology into really picking apart why I'm doing things, because, I've had binge eating disorder. And at the time I was binge eating, I didn't even associate that or even think of the negative feelings around it. It just kind of in my mind, I'm like, oh, I just have no control over food. I have no willpower. And it's so strange how like my brain didn't connect those things, but now I can. And for me too, because I'm also very interested in nutrition, and it's been, a topic of conversation of maybe going back to school for dietetics and stuff like that. But the more and more I know, the more I just love the psychology of it and the mental issues that go with it, because that's so much of my own journey of kind of unwinding the way that, I perceive things, or my, the traumas I've been through or anything like that, and what that association is with the food, and how I'm using my mind to make those choices, or even how I'm using my mind to find my own motivation to continue a healthy lifestyle, or to go to the gym when I don't want to go, and things like that. It's just like it all kind of, begins in the mind. And when you start kind of picking that apart, I think is so much of the solution, in my personal opinion. So I think I think that you're going to school for that, and you're using that degree in this, health and fitness arena is amazing, because it feels like that's something, it doesn't get discussed as much as it should. It kind of goes into the calories in, calories out sort of, expenditure conversation, especially when it comes to weight loss, and not like how are you using your brain in this process?
Thank you. Yeah, no, I agree completely. And I love that that's something you're passionate about and you've seen make an impact in your journey. A lot of what happens in fitness is things get chunked down to the easy to understand, right? Okay, it's going to be all your calories. That's all you have to worry about. Or, oh, it's just going to be about what are you eating today? Or let's make it the diet that it excludes all of these foods. That makes it easy, right? But psychology makes things complicated. And so does when you really get into the nitty-gritty of nutrition, things get complicated. And then you have the addition of how the brain and the body are interacting together. All those things are complicated. They're difficult to understand. And one of the bigger reasons that people don't even embark or have success in their fitness journey is because it's a challenge. It's hard. It's different than what they're used to. And that's what they've been taught to believe. But I think as soon as we harness our mind, we can actually make things a lot easier than we've been led on to believe it has to be.
Definitely. So, I mean, how do you, with working with clients that you're coaching at all different levels, like what are the easiest ways for you to get that across, since it is such a complicated topic and it feels like everybody has their own, flavor of things that they're bringing to how they view food and their body and exercise? Like, what are the easiest ways for you to kind of, get in their head and explain this to them?
I would say we go with what's impacting them most first. So what are they wondering about? What do they feel disconnected to? What are they struggling with? Once we get kind of like the presenting issues, we can then dig a little deeper and get to the surface. Much like you probably don't go up to your clients and say, oh, look at all these things in nutrition and all the data and look at all this, right? Like that would overwhelm people. So to make it a complicated topic simple, we just get to the root of what's happening for this person. And that might uncover some of the other things that are happening. But I like to just say, if this person comes to me and they say, I really am struggling with feeling restricted. I want to be successful. I want to lose weight, or I want to achieve this goal, but I'm feeling restricted. I can't stop eating off my plan. I don't get it. Then what we might say is, well, what's making you feel restricted? What would not feeling restricted actually look like? And why can't you achieve your goals in that way? So we have to challenge perception and challenge what we think and our beliefs about success or about achieving a certain result. And I think that alone can open up the door for maybe the more difficult conversations.
Yeah, that's awesome. With as far as like, I know that, obviously your podcast is about bikini competitors and you're one yourself. Of what, as a person that has not done that, my immediate thought goes to like, that seems like restriction. Like you have to get to such a low body fat percentage. I mean, it is a lot. I mean, that is definitely, it becomes your life whenever you're at that level, especially with your food and being very particular about what you put into your body. And I have friends that have competed before and just the insane regimen they get into. So how do you go into, okay, I want to compete in bikini, but still have a healthy relationship with restriction?
Ooh, that's a really, really good question. And you're right. It is restrictive. Just like anything, like not even just competing, but if we're trying to lose weight, we're going against the homeostasis, right? We're challenging homeostasis in the way of there's no longer balance. We're saying we're going to go into a deficit, for example, or we're going to work against our body in a way that we haven't before. We're going to challenge our limits that we've never pushed before. And that's what bikini and bodybuilding is throughout the whole entire journey. You're really challenging those limits. You're either eating in a surplus to gain muscle and gain weight, or you're eating in a deficit to lose that and reveal this shape that you're being judged on. And I like to say, why is it that we immediately perceive it as restricted instead of something that's helping us to achieve and align with our goals in other areas of our life? So yes, we can acknowledge it's restrictive. And yes, we can be honest and truthful with ourselves that we're doing things that maybe are not the healthiest thing to do, but at the same time, can we step back and see the value in doing that for other reasons? Or maybe see how can we make this feel less restrictive for us? Because if we're told you could only have chicken and vegetables every single day, yeah, that sucks. Yeah. You're going to feel restricted, but why is that the only way to do it? It's really not. So I think it just comes down to understanding the timeline, because as a competitor, you have, let's say you're given a 12-week plan and that's what you have to follow. But if you could have Taco Tuesday every week and it would take you 20 weeks to get there, is that worth it to you? Do you want to have that? And if so, that's okay too. We just have to change our definition of what it means to really be successful and how we see that restriction.
Yeah, or maybe even just change the word from restriction to sacrifice. I don't know why that seems to have a better ring to it. Because, that's anything. Like if you have any sort of goal, you're going to have to sacrifice some amount of free time or some of the things that you're doing to achieve those goals. Because hard goals, you're going to have to change in order to make it happen. So maybe it's just to be like, I'm not restricting myself of those things. I'm temporarily sacrificing those things to get what I want. At least that's, I guess, helpful for me of thinking, when you have the temptation, especially like if you're working in your, a classic like office setting, which I did for years working in radio, like here comes the free donuts and here comes the Christmas cookies and the pizza and everything else of just kind of like, I'm not telling myself, no, are not allowed, but I'm making the personal sacrifice because my goals are more important to me. So again, I guess it goes back to like the way that your brain or your mindset towards the thing.
Choosing versus controlling. Like,
Yeah.
I'm choosing not to have this for this reason. It doesn't mean I'm never going to choose to have it again. And how we talk about food also to other people or to ourselves or in those processes is so important. If you're on a diet and someone offers you something that maybe doesn't align with your diet goals at that point in time, or it's not as worthy of a swap as something else that you've already planned to have in your plan, you might say to them, I can't have that right now, but I can't wait until I can. That'll be awesome. You know, you're reinforcing this conversation that you can't have and enjoy the foods that you're having while dieting, rather than saying, hey, I'm going to choose not to have that today. Super appreciate your offer. Maybe I can work that in next week. Just let me know ahead of time. And that kind of has a different tone and ring to it than something like, I can't have this, or I'm never going to have this. And then after my show or after this diet, I'm going to have as much of it as I can. It's just like, hey, not at this point in time, but in the future, I might be able to work that in. I definitely want to share that experience with you. And if not that, then let's plan something else.
What would you say? I mean, I think that, this topic of like restriction or all or nothing and that kind of mindset is obviously pretty prevalent in everybody. But like, what are the most other like common issues that you see that, specifically women have with food?
That's a good question as well. It definitely depends on what stage they're at. I see a lot of people feeling they have to punish themselves for decisions that they make. So let's say they go off their plan. They're like, well, if I go off my plan, then I'll just do an extra 30 minutes of cardio. I'll do an extra hour of cardio, or I won't eat XYZ tomorrow. And those justifications, that's something I see a lot. So the punishment mindset or justifying decisions being made by restricting or punishing later, that's definitely a big one. Another thing I see too is the morality with food, or the good versus bad, like, oh, I'm better because I eat all whole foods, or it's bad to eat processed foods. So that comes into play. And then the feeling or need to satisfy everybody else around them. So it's difficult sometimes to have a healthy relationship with food when you're feeling the pressure from people in your life or in your circle, or you're in circumstances where that's challenged. And you could be on a gut health protocol and not able to eat certain things and feel like that is a challenge then to connect with other people in your life. So that can bring in the topic of emotional eating. So these are a few of the maybe more common things that I see.
So how did you become interested in this space that you're like, man, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to get several degrees. I'm going to have a podcast. Like where did this like passion and love for this topic come in for you?
With my own struggles, really. I started my fitness journey in high school, and I thought like the way that I approached it was actually really unhealthy. I forced myself to work out after everything that I ate. I really didn't conceptualize what it would mean to appreciate and love my body as anything more than just what she looked like. So instead of seeing loving myself as nourishing my body, I saw it as like punishing and changing and never being good enough. And I equated so much of my worth and mood and affect to that. And I grew up as an athlete, so much of what I did was about being the best and being better and improving. And so while those are all really good qualities, I think sometimes they got the best of me. And I was inspired to help other people on their fitness journey, because fitness did change my life, but ultimately I realized it was more of a bandage than it was anything else. I had this deep wound that I wasn't willing to perform surgery on, because that would mean I'd have to get help and I'd have to do this inner work that would have been really challenging. I was struggling with depression. I was struggling with the anxiety. I was constantly judging my body and myself and using it maybe as a control mechanism, but more so than that, just because it was a way that I could prove to myself that I'm really, really good at this thing. And I can change my body and I can love my body for that. And I can be super fit. And when I realized that I didn't love myself, and I realized that this was really unhealthy, what I was doing, constantly punishing myself and beating myself up. And I was binging all the time because I was perfect Monday through Friday. And I thought, oh, okay, I was perfect Monday through Friday. So now I binge on the weekends and then I repeat. And I actually had a permission slip to binge on the weekends. I hired an online coach one time and I remember it was like, okay, this is your meal plan every day of the week. And then on Saturday, you get to have whatever you want. And I thought that that was what you had to do. Like, I genuinely just wasn't educated enough to know that it didn't have to be that way. And I didn't see that that was perpetuating this unhealthy belief or standard that that's how you're healthy, to binge on the weekends as long as you're perfect throughout the week. And I came to this realization after my first show. And at the time, I started studying the clinical nutrition dietetics. I just didn't really like it, but I kept hanging on to this dream of helping people with their nutrition and fitness because I was really passionate about it at the time, but I just hadn't done enough of the deep healing for myself. And I had gotten a therapist at 18 who really, really helped me. She really changed my life. And that definitely didn't inspire me to become a therapist or a counselor at all. But now looking back, I see that it was really influential in my journey. And when I was getting my bachelor's degree, first off in clinical nutrition and dietetics, I was almost through with it for the most part. And then I was like, this is just not for me. I had been working with a mindset mentor as well, and she really opened my eyes to see that so much of this is happening below the surface. And I knew that that was really my true passion. And I thought I was going to drop out of school and just run my business and help people with self-love and fitness after that. And I realized, like, no, that wasn't the case. And I had two really amazing parents who were willing to put me through school. And they said, no, you either move out or you finish your degree. I said, okay, I'll finish my degree. But I said, I'm switching. I got to get it in psychology. And it was just a combination of those things that led me to seeing this was really my true path. And when I switched to psychology, I honestly, I knew it was going to be about helping people with their relationship with food. I knew it was going to be about helping people with their overall mindset and personal development. But I didn't know that it would turn into what it has now at the time. I just knew I couldn't tell people what to eat. I needed to do more for myself and for my passions and leave that up to other people. And that's really how I ended up here, is just I fell in love with knowing more about how our mind works, and not even just for fitness, but for all aspects, for how we raise children and how we see other people and everything that has to do with psychology. I just really love. And I said, I have to keep doing this, but I focused a majority of my efforts on eating disorders and self-affect and all these things because I knew that was really the population I wanted to work with.
Oh, I love that so much. And I love too, just kind of the theme of that, at least, what I hear is how many people helped you along the way where you asked for help, and I think that that's so important. And that's, it's such an important message of mine that I've learned through my own journey is if you're struggling, it's okay to ask for help. You don't have to do this on your own. Of talk to someone, hire a coach, whatever you need to do. That it's difficult. And just like you said, the people you've met along the way have just kind of changed a lot of things for you and led you to the path you're on now, where you can help so many people. And I think that's, I don't know why, and then myself speaking, it's so hard to reach out for help, but it's like, it can be so important.
Yeah, that's a good point. And not a lot of people really draw that conclusion when I share about my story, but it's true. I always hired mentors. I had an amazing first business mentor. I had an amazing mindset mentor who I met when I was speaking at a seminar, and I appreciated those relationships so much, and they did make an impact. And I think this also was really challenging for me because I had to grieve so much of who I once thought I was or who I thought I would be. And that can be so hard. And that's true for weight loss. That's true for competitions. I mean, you're changing into this new person. And there were times I was like, I have to let go of wanting to be the star college volleyball player. I need to let go of being this dietitian, this registered dietitian that I thought I was going to be. And by being okay with letting go of all these old parts of me and all the things I thought I knew as well about what it takes to be fit and healthy and have this amazing self-image that you really appreciate and you love yourself, I had to change all those pathways in my brain. And I'm so glad that I did. As hard as it was worth it. And so if you're listening, or if you're me or you're Amanda and you know you need help with something, get help with it, because it does pay off in the end, as hard as it can be.
Man, I've never heard it put that way either, of having to grieve, just your former version of yourself or who you thought you would be. And that is spot on. That's an amazing thought, but it's just kind of like you kind of have to let that person go. If you're really being like, I want to change and I want to evolve into this new person, you're going to have to kind of say goodbye to some things. And, some habits you're happy to get rid of, but other ones, it's just kind of like built who you are and built your personality, and kind of changing that's brutal.
Yes, it is, especially if there's people who expected things of you, or you expected things of yourself. Like, oh, I always thought that I would be this person and I built my identity around this person. And then to say, it doesn't serve me anymore and it's not healthy for me. It takes courage.
Yeah. Well, and you were just mentioning too, like kind of changing the neural pathways in your brain to kind of be like,
Yes.
no, I'm building these habits. I'm this new person now. Like, what kind of advice would you have for? So, I mean, obviously it's different for every case, and that is an extremely complicated thing, but is there any way to sort of, because I've done that myself and I'm still going through it. So any like simplification of like, how do you really kind of go through that process?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll simplify it in two ways. So one, I'll use like a bit of an analogy that's completely out of the brain, because I sometimes find taking things out of context helps bring it into context. But if you go hiking and you see like all these bike grooves where bikers have gone over and over again, or where water has run down a mountain over and over again, and they're really, really deep, it's because that's the course that's been run over and over and over again. And as soon as maybe a biker or water takes a different path, it's not always the smoothest at first, or sometimes it's better. Like a biker doesn't want to be in those deep grooves, but because they've been put there for so long, they're like, they have no choice. But as soon as you kind of go off the path or you build a new one, it's so much better. And it can be challenging at first, but with repetition, it now becomes the deeper groove. It becomes the deeper path. It becomes the better flow for water. It turns into a waterfall, whatever. So the same thing applies for our brain. We need to repeat. Repetition is the key in changing your neural pathways. And the beautiful thing is that you can change them. And the funny thing is that our brain always makes shortcuts. So if you have something that you associate, let's say you associate sadness with ice cream on the couch. Your brain was not probably one day like, oh, this is a really good decision. This is what we should do forever. But it realized that it was beneficial for you. So it made this shortcut that, oh, if Ben and Jerry's makes me happy, and so does sitting on the couch, and I'm feeling sad right now, then those two things go together and I'll be perfectly fine. Rather than, oh, if I process or if I meditate or if I sit through this, those things are not strong enough yet. Why would your brain go to them? It uses the shortcut pathway, the pathway that's already there. So to build a new one, you really just have to focus on repetition. And I recommend using repetition even outside of the circumstance which you need it. So if you are trying to break a pattern of turning to food when you're emotional, then start doing things that satisfy those emotions you usually turn to food for. For example, sadness again, and say, well, okay, what else makes me happy? Maybe it's coloring books, or maybe it's calling a friend, or maybe it's taking a bubble bath or watching comedy shows or listening to great podcasts like this one. And then you say, oh, I know what I can do. I can start planning this into my schedule every day of the week or every couple days or whatever works for you. And now that allows your brain to get this information or this association of this making you happy. And if you can condition yourself to see how good it makes you feel by celebrating it when you're doing it, focusing on, wow, oh my gosh, I feel so good. This makes me so happy. Then what you're doing is you're creating a new pathway that says this equals happiness. So in those moments where you want to turn to something to make you happy, maybe it's no longer the ice cream on the couch. Instead, it becomes, well, I'm already going to be listening to this podcast later. I'm already going to be taking that bubble bath. It's already in your schedule, even to the point where you might not even need those other things. You might not even get to the point of sadness because you're being proactive and you're doing it on repeat.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. That's great advice. I'm also a huge fan of like habit stacking too, of like taking an old habit and attaching the new one to it to kind of just, for me, like I know first thing I want is coffee, but I'm like, I know how important water is. So I'm like, it's a cup of water before the coffee. And then I associate them together because it's just like
exactly
burning that new habit into the old one. And yeah, and I don't know if you know the science. What's the exact day amount or whatever it is to like create a new habit? It's like
I honestly think all of that's BS.
Okay.
Like, to be totally honest, I'm like, I've seen people do things for 100 days and it doesn't matter. And I've seen people do things for 21 days and it changes their life. I think the real key to habit change is seeing the value in that change, seeing that it's serving you on more levels than just the idea that you should be taking on this new habit. I think that's what creates real habit change, more so than the amount of days, because me and you both have probably done things for multiple days straight and don't do it anymore.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it's just the value in seeing like, oh, this actually really matters to me.
That's awesome. So are these some of the things that you wrote about in your book?
In my book, I really focused more so on personal development, not so much food relationship or body image. Well, there was body image, just like self-love related work that applies to body image. But I wrote that book when I was in the transitioning time into my psychology degree. And that book was really written to show people what changed my mindset. And that was a lot of identity work, goal setting, and acting from that version of you that you want to become without it being this incredibly critical judge of you. And one of my favorite clinical psychologists says it really well. He says, whenever you have an ideal, you also have a judge. And I like to think, well, okay, yes, keep the ideal, but just change the way that ideal version of you talks to yourself. So in the book, I really break down the exact things that I did to change my mindset. We go over the power of things like I am, but then not even just I am this, but actually creating that version of you. So it's all about loving yourself as you are, but also accepting that you want to be better and breaking down the steps to actually get to that. I call it Operation Badass, and I break down what that really looks like to get there.
That's awesome. So, I mean, I have to ask, because I've had so many people tell me that I should write a book. And I'm like, that sounds like a giant pain in the ass. Like, how do you just sit down one day and you're like, I'm going to write a book? That sounds so overwhelming.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. I think you would be able to write a book though. I know you say like in your podcast that like you don't like writing and you prefer speaking.
Yeah.
I think you could do it anyway. Like I literally wrote, but I love writing, but you could still do it because I work with other people and we always tell them like, speak. You can dictate your book. Like you can write it using dictation. And if that's better for you and then go through and edit it, you could totally do that. I bet you could write a book in a weekend because if you just talk about 3 different topics that you want to cover and you just talk and you send it to an editor, or you edit it yourself, you probably surprise yourself. But
I never thought about it that way.
Yeah, you
I could talk for an entire weekend.
Yes, exactly. Go for it. You could do it. Like you got to find your process, and if that's it, do that. And I don't know. Like when I wrote mine, it only took me 2 weeks. And
oh my God.
Yes,
you can do Superwoman, man. Dang.
But it's because the mission was there. You know, when you have that message, you have what you want to share. I was working for someone else at the time, actually, and I was sitting at the desk. I don't know if they'll ever figure that out, but I was writing my book while there, and it felt so good. And I was actually writing too. I was writing an ebook that I thought would be like a freebie. And then I was writing a book and I said, one of these has to be the actual book. And, you know, from a marketing perspective, maybe the one that I made the freebie would have been better, but it wasn't me. But this Believe Your Way to Badass was totally like this next evolutionary step in where I was becoming. And I'm really glad that I did that. And I think once you make that decision, it's solid. And of course, I would never recommend you lock yourself in your room for the whole weekend and talk to your computer if you don't want to, but at least for a sustainable amount of time, it's not grueling at all. I don't think so. I think it can be later, especially as you start adding more information. And at that time, I wasn't adding in tons of research and I wasn't adding in all the things that I now take into account. that book would have been written differently now. But if I were to write a book again starting tomorrow, I'd probably set aside like an hour each day until I was done, because that would be sustainable for me.
And you can get that book on Amazon?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. I'll have to check that out.
Mhm.
So out of all the things that you offer, I mean, you have, your podcast, your book, but and I know that you're doing some coaching for Sarah and Team Fit With Me, but do you do one-on-one coaching? Do you do group coaching? Like what do you spend the majority of your time doing, besides going to school and everything else? Jeez. In your insane schedule, like what kind of, do you do one-on-one coaching, or how does that work?
Yeah. Majority of my time is spent with one-on-one coaching, and that's usually with coaching calls. And I communicate with my clients every single day, because we were just talking about changing your neural pathways. And my more popular program is my 5-week food relationship program. And we're in communication every single day in that program, because we need to change those pathways. And I'd rather have someone spend 5 weeks every single day intensely with me than 6 months with maybe one check-in a month, and it's still not the same as the 5 weeks. So that repetition is so important to me, and I've seen that be successful. So majority of my time is spent with one-on-one coaching. I do group coaching calls every month with those clients, as well as clients of like my platform and other programs that I have. And that's really what I put my focus on, is the one-on-one and the group coaching calls. Aside from that, though, it's mainly how I spend my time in my business.
So tell me about the 5-week food coaching course.
So I developed it with people who are on a fitness journey in mind. I never want people to feel like they can't achieve their physical results at the sacrifice, or I should say, I never want people to feel like they have to give up their physical results for the sake of their mental health. I think both can be working together, and they could be worked on at the same time. In other words, I have developed this so that people who are trying to lose weight, or trying to prep for a competition, or coming out of a competition, or reverse dieting, or just trying to get in a healthy state of mind and having a healthy relationship with food, intuitive eating, or gut health, can also feel that they can spend time on their mind without being told, oh, you have to stop your diet. I don't believe that. So the program starts, it's this, I call it the peace through growth process. And I developed it with the intention of having a discovery phase first. The discovery phase is where we're really understanding your relationship with food as it is and where you want it to go, as well as some of your other goals and things that you really value in your life. And then we go into a bit of a incubation phase where you're really implementing everything, and you're going into this process of daily commitment. Mealtime rituals and daily reflections are done every single day with every meal. And then we're having our coaching calls during this phase too, really understanding what's going on, breaking it down, and developing specific action steps for you. You're also in a client portal with tons of resources. I mean, tons of them. So whether it's emotional eating, or it's interrupting patterns that you have, or it's understanding why you feel so negatively and doubt yourself all the time, these things are in there. And I guide my clients to access those things when it makes sense too, because I don't want it to be overwhelming in that short 5 weeks period. And then after that, we go into an integration phase where they're really integrating everything that they've learned and realized into their life. And hopefully by then it's become such a pattern and habit. Most of my clients tell me, oh, wow, I'm associating with food so much differently now than I was before. I look at food completely differently than before. I'm not on autopilot mode. I'm not questioning every decision I make. I'm not punishing myself. It's really, the goal is to get to a new state of mind, to get to that healthy relationship with food you want.
That's awesome. So, I mean, even like, and if you're cool with sharing this, so like doing all of this, and I mean, all this stuff is amazing, helping other people and having so much knowledge behind you. Like, what do you still struggle with?
Thank you for asking. I sometimes do still struggle with body image, which I've kind of come to this conclusion actually very recently, that I have to accept that my body is my body, and it's going to be different than other people's, and it might even be different than the expectation I once had that my body would be. But I still struggle sometimes, because even despite my best efforts, right, despite my best efforts to my plan and my programming and to my life and all these values, my body still changes. And sometimes it changes in ways that I don't expect, and sometimes it changes in ways I do. And that's sometimes difficult for me to wrap my head around. And in bodybuilding, like, you're kind of just subscribing to this belief that you're always going to be judged by your body. That is what the sport is. And so that is sometimes still a struggle. And I accept that that's a risk that I run by being a competitor. And I do struggle as well with other things in life outside of food and outside of body. Like, I lost my mom in February. That's been really, really hard for me. That grief and that trauma has been extremely challenging. And I sometimes struggle with communication. I'm not perfect, and I can know these things. We can all know things and still need help or still need guidance or reviewing it. And sometimes I have to review, oh, how did I approach that conversation? How could I have been better in how I communicated my point, or in that argument, or in that situation? And I'd say those are some of the things that I still find myself struggling with.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of thinking, coming off of, and which I'm sorry about your mom.
Thank you.
With grief and trauma like that, I just started reading a book about trauma-informed weightlifting, of thinking of how your body holds trauma inside, and you might not even be really realizing it, all varying degrees of trauma, and then how can you work through that trauma by movement? Because there's trauma-informed yoga, and then I'm reading about, I'm more into throwing heavy things around than yoga personally.
Yeah.
I just started the book, so I haven't got through it, but I also love that thought too of, you have all these major life events of, even as much as, you've studied and you have a lot of this stuff, figured out for yourself of, you can't plan for a loss of a loved one, and how are you going to tackle that emotionally, and how is your body going to do that, and how can you work through those things? And I think that that's such an important part of health too, of realizing that, that sometimes not only talking to somebody about it, but how are you moving your body and nourishing your body to ways to kind of deal with these really hard things, as we just, global pandemic, dealing with some hard things. Like, how are we holding that in our bodies, and how do we deal? You know what I mean? It's such a difficult question and thing to go through, but it's like, you can't forget that, your mind is in your body, and this is something that you got to take care of through the process.
That's so true. It's funny too, because when we're talking about it, me and you, and I hear you talking, I think about, different research that's been done, different things that have been proposed, but sometimes it is difficult to apply that to ourselves. And sometimes it is difficult to step out. And that's why, like you said, people need to ask for help. It's okay to get it. And also take care of that mind, because your body will respond regardless, because your body is the one, and your mind working with your body is all the same. It's all processing together. So there's neurotransmitters being released in these situations. There's hormones being released. There's all these different communication patterns happening. I'm sorry, I have a little cold, so I don't mean to sound nasally. But there's all these communication patterns happening. And if we don't recognize that they will only continue to happen that way, if we don't address it, it gets harder and harder to deal with it. And you're right. There's a lot of things that we can do for our body that also impact our mind. People can take certain supplements that help improve their mood. People can work on their gut health. People can move their body. You can do yoga with more intention, or lift with more intention. Even lifting weights is a great way to relieve anxiety, because you're contracting and you're releasing, and this conscious contraction and release produces such a great impact in the body and in the mind, showing that you have that ability to do that. And then you go through traumatic events and experiences. And I know, especially for there's research out there for sexual assault and sexual trauma victims. Unfortunately, this is the reality that we live in. And luckily there's ways to get through it, but your body develops protection mechanisms. And sometimes we develop a desire to gain weight because we see it as protection for our body. We sometimes desire an ability to lose weight because we see it as protection for ourselves in some way, or helping us evolve in some hierarchical structure that we've seen as beneficial for others. And there's so many things contributing this. Like we talked at the very, very beginning, it's very complicated. But ultimately, what you're dealing with right now, you can get help with and you can make it through. You're never stuck. That's a beautiful thing about your brain. You're never stuck. You could change it.
Well, and even bring back to the point that you made earlier too, of just to do those things through, a place of healing yourself and loving yourself and not through punishment. And it feels like so much, food and exercise and everything could come from just punishment or numbing out instead of a place of actually taking care of yourself.
So true. Like, why am I actually eating this way? Why am I actually doing this? If we can step back and come out of the autopilot mode that we're so good at being in, we might actually develop more understanding of ourselves that sets us up for that greater long-term success.
Yeah. I know when I started meeting with my therapist, she made the point of like, no, you need to just feel this. Like you can't numb out with an ice cream cake, and you can't numb out by, doing 2 a days at the gym. You're going to have to sit there and feel it and really feel it and understand it, and then just let it pass. And so you're not just keep holding on to it. And that's one of those things where it's like, God, this sucks. Like it sucks to feel those feelings, but ultimately it feels so much better to not just keep pushing them down further and further. And for me, I mean, I've just been such an emotional eater and a numb out eater of like, that's so many issues I've dealt with for my entire life to, one, understand that's what I was doing, and two, to feel those feelings and feel the negative feelings and let them pass without punishing myself is such a huge win. And it's just a place that I'm glad that, you're doing the work that you're doing, because it feels like that's something that so many people could use help with, but just the conversation isn't plastered all over Instagram every day.
Yeah, because it's like, where do we start, and what would it mean if we all accepted that it's actually beneficial to sit in the struggle and to learn from it, and to recognize finally that emotions are there for a reason. They're normal response to stimuli in our life. And so they're teaching us something so we can improve and protect for something in the future. And sometimes those emotional responses are abnormal, just like our events in our life can be abnormal. Like all of last year was very abnormal. And it's a historical change that we're all adjusting to. But to that point, it's not worse to sit in the emotions and process them than it is to consistently wonder, what do I do with this feeling? It's so much nicer when we know exactly what we need to do with the feeling and address it, and understand that because we are these complex beings, the feelings will always be there. The emotions will always be there. So if you can learn how to cope with them, that's really powerful for your life. Really powerful.
So once you finish up your master's degree and everything, what are the plans for you? Are you wanting to do like a private practice, to still doing online coaching? What are your goals?
That's a complicated question I ask myself every day.
I understand.
Yeah, I can tell, because you're like, do I go back to school for dietetics?
Yeah.
I don't know. I really think I want to get my PhD. I want to contribute. I've been developing like a list of dissertation ideas since the moment I entered psychology. So I think I might go for my PhD, which would allow me to serve more as a quote consultant than a licensed counselor. Unfortunately, there's a lot of things in the counseling practice that are not being done for counselors. They don't have reciprocity that's easy for people to attain. So someone like me who's servicing people globally can't do that as a licensed professional counselor. So it's better for me to just stay a coach. And then now I have to jump through the hoops of also being someone who knows counseling. And it's a very difficult line, and you got to be careful, and make sure you're doing what's within your purview to do, if you want to say. So I really see myself probably getting PhD. I have goals of opening up my own practices, yes, in the future, maybe as a recovery center with more wellness-based focus. I also see myself hosting group therapy retreats. So I see myself using the knowledge I have. What I call it, I don't know yet.
That's awesome. Those are some amazing goals. I mean, ultimately, I that it seems like, you're just choosing a life to serve other people and help them live their best life. And that's pretty awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, exactly. And that's what counts.
Definitely. So if somebody is listening to this and really, is resonating with you, where are all the best ways to find you, to join your programs, to get your book, listen to your podcast, all the things.
All the things. Yeah. I appreciate that. Well, you guys can go to Instagram, celestial_fit, or my website, celestial.fit. If you want a free coaching experience, I have a free food relationship coaching series that you can get at celestial.fit/food series. So if any of this resonated or you want to learn more, that I go very in depth. People are surprised. It's like a full-on program. So definitely buckle up and get ready if you're going to do it and really commit to it. But know that I'm here to support you the whole way through it. So yeah, connect with me any of those ways.
That's awesome. I'm so glad that Sarah introduced us, because I love what you're doing, and I could probably talk to you about this stuff all day.
Me too, you.
So if you are welcome back anytime, and if you ever want to chat, you're always welcome back here. And thank you so much for giving me some of your time today.
Me too, you. Thank you.
For info on health coaching and more, go to AmandaValentineBites.com.